What's the sticker price on this controversial Snow White remake? A jaw-dropping $270 million. I don't usually do reviews for films fresh out of the cinema, but when I do, I often end up going alone. Most people I know aren't exactly thrilled to spend their day watching a kid's movie, but usually it's not too bad. When I went for Sonic or the Super Mario Bros. Movie, the theaters were packed and I could just blend into the crowd. For my screening of Snow White, there couldn't have been more than 10 people in the entire theater. That's a bizarre sight for a film tied to such a legendary legacy. The original 1937 Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs wasn't just Disney's first ever feature, it was also the first ever hand-drawn animated movie. Back then, many thought it was impossible to make a full-length animated film. Would audiences sit through more than an hour of animation? Would the sheer cost and effort even be worth it? Walt Disney believed in the project with his whole heart, pouring in time, money, and revolutionary new technologies. The film's sound and visuals were groundbreaking, unlike anything the world had seen before, and thanks to that dedication, Snow White became a massive hit, catapulting Disney to success and laying the foundation for the entire animation industry. So, you'd think that Disney, recognizing the legacy of its first masterpiece, would honor its history and celebrate it with a faithful live-action adaptation. But as details about the remake started surfacing, red flags went up. It became clear that Disney wasn't interested in recreating the magic of the original. Instead, they were changing everything, from altering the plot to replacing the dwarfs, and even reinventing Snow White herself. The studio seemed determined to rewrite history rather than pay tribute to it. And at the center of it all, Rachel Zegler, whose casting and comments only added fuel to the fire. From the moment Disney announced Rachel Zegler as the new Snow White, controversy was inevitable. Many saw it as yet another example of Disney's tendency to race-swap iconic characters, raising concerns that the studio wasn't interested in a faithful recreation of the beloved classic. Now, in some cases, you could argue that race doesn't necessarily affect a character as long as the actor delivers a great performance. But in Snow White's case, it actually does matter. In the original fairy tale, Snow White's very name comes from her defining physical trait. Her parents wished for a daughter with skin as white as snow. This wasn't just a random detail. It was central to the character's identity. By changing that, the remake effectively removes the entire reasoning behind her name. But the controversy didn't stop there. Rachel Zegler herself only made things worse. In early interviews, she openly criticized the original, calling it dated, mocking its classic love story, and insisting that this new version was made for a modern 2022 audience. During one interview, she even took a jab at the prince, saying, "There is a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. Weird." With comments like that, the film stopped feeling like a homage to a legendary Disney masterpiece, and instead seemed more like an attempt to discredit and dismiss it. The message felt clear. The original was outdated, problematic, and embarrassing. But don't worry, we're here to fix it. But did Disney really fix anything, or did they just alienate the very audience that cherished this story for generations? Disney probably thought they were delivering the Snow White that a modern audience deserves. But to their surprise, audiences did not take kindly to it. From the moment the trailers and other promotional material hit the internet, backlash was swift. Videos were flooded with dislikes, and criticism was everywhere. People weren't buying into the idea of a Snow White remake that seemed more focused on correcting past mistakes rather than honoring the original. Sensing he damage, Disney scrambled for damage control. Rachel Zegler, who had previously been vocal about her issues with the classic film, suddenly seemed muzzled. Her interviews took on a much more careful tone, and she even started praising the original. The cartoon is so beloved. It's like a monumental moment in film history. It won honorary Oscars, and all these amazing things happened because of it. That's the reason you and I get to sit here today. Sound like a drastic change in attitude? You're not alone in thinking that. Then came another suspicious move. Disney delayed the film's release by an entire year. Officially, they blamed it on the 2023 actor strike, but speculation suggests otherwise. Many believe the studio was scrambling behind the scenes, frantically, rewriting and reshooting parts of the film to avoid an even bigger disaster, and judging by the final product, that theory holds a lot of weight. At first, things seem familiar. Snow White is still a servant under the rule of the evil queen, and we get a few extra scenes exploring her childhood. Eventually, the queen learns that Snow White is the fairest of them all, forcing Snow White to flee into the woods. Then, the movie takes a wild detour. Instead of the traditional dwarfs, Snow White meets a group of 7 random bandits, including the prince, or rather, the head bandit. Remember that infamous image that circulated online, where people speculated those were supposed to be the 7 dwarfs? Yeah, turns out they were just a group of random travelers. With all the drastic changes, it's no wonder fans feel like this Snow White is anything but the classic they grew up with. So, after meeting the bandits, Snow White spends a brief time with them until the so-called prince suddenly takes an arrow to the chest. The bandits rush him back to the dwarf's house, where he's miraculously healed. And then, they just leave. That's it. No further explanation, no real impact on the story. Now, here's where things get interesting. A lot of people suspect that these bandits were originally meant to be the 7 dwarfs, but after facing massive backlash, Disney cut their roll down and hastily shoved the classic dwarfs back into the film. Out of the 7 bandits, only 2, the prince and the short one, get any meaningful dialogue or screen time. There's a brief line hinting at a romance between the short bandit and another one, but it's immediately dropped and never mentioned again. It feels bizarre to introduce 7 unique characters only for them to have zero impact on the plot. It's almost like Disney was trying to hide the evidence of their original plan from this point. The movie starts resembling the original classic, but with a few weird twists. The evil queen still disguises herself as the old woman and tricks Snow White into eating the poisoned apple, just like in the 1937 film. Snow White collapses, unconscious. Then, another change. In the original, the dwarfs chase the queen down a mountain, causing her to fall to her death before the prince arrives to awaken Snow White. Here, however, the prince arrives first and revives Snow White with a kiss. Wait a minute, didn't Rachel Ziegler go viral for criticizing this very scene? She's not going to be saved by the prince. She's not going to be dreaming about true love. But here she is, getting rescued by the prince anyway? What happened to all that talk about modernizing Snow White? With Snow White awake, she and the prince head to the queen's castle for a final confrontation. Instead of an epic showdown, Snow White does absolutely nothing. She walks into the kingdom, says nothing, and somehow, the people just start rallying behind her. That's it. No speech, no action, just instant support for no real reason. So after all the talk about making Snow White strong and independent, she doesn't actually do anything to defeat the queen. And that, my friends, is how Disney completely fumbled a classic. So, after all the build-up, Snow White walks into the kingdom, and suddenly, the people start rallying behind her. Earlier, in the film, the prince literally states that most citizens assumed Snow White was complicit in the queen's tyrannical rule because they had never seen her for years. She just shows up, and everyone's suddenly on her side. No speech, no proof, just instant loyalty. This moment is completely unearned and makes zero sense. Then, the queen orders one of her guards to kill Snow White, but instead of doing it herself, she gives the order to some random henchman. Why? No clue. And here's where things get even weirder. Snow White, instead of fighting back, starts listing off personal details about the guards. Oh, Paul, I remember you. You have a wife, and you used to be a farmer who grew cherry orchards. She does this for every single guard, and just like that, they all turn on the queen. Had we actually seen past flashbacks of Snow White interacting with these people as a child, this moment might have carried weight, but instead, we just get a brief narration about how these guards once had dreams of being farmers. So when Snow White reminds them of that, they instantly switch sides. This feels rushed and completely unearned, like a last-minute rewrite thrown in to give Snow White some sort of influence over the plot.